one moment to feel the breath of God that has just come to the Take 1 second out to just bless God in whatever way God allows you to be blessed. Just feel God for a moment. Glory God. Never put more on us than we can bear. Yes, just breathe in God right now and let go of everything that you are worried about. Breathe in God right now and let go of anything that you might be anxious about. Breathe in God right now and then exhale anything that might be distracting you from this moment. Breathe in God right now. Exhale. Yes. The children have been dismissed for children's church. Amen. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. I am always humbled and grateful for an opportunity to stand before you. I never take this privilege lightly. Just because you are called to preach does not mean that you are given opportunities. And so I am always, always grateful when my older brother in the ministry, who also served as a father to me in so many ways, when I'm able to commune with Sister Shonda, even follow all the updates that Sister Amanda, now Eastern, is doing now, and Brother Gary, they have always believed in me. They did not force me to be something that I was not. They made room for my gifts. And even in a denomination like ours, it is rare for people to make room for your gifts. You see how God makes room for you. And so I am grateful. And the stories he tells are true. He is the man of God. And I bring you greetings from Bishop Thomas L. Brown in his absence. And he's the 6th Episcopal District Bishop, as well as my home church, Westside Community CME Church, and the pastor, Reverend Andre Lloyd. We have already received a word for the day, but I'm going to make this offering something even a little bit more for what we have for today. Let us go before the Lord in prayer. Gracious Almighty God, we come before you now saying thank you for this day. Thank you for these moments. Thank you for how you already have moved in this space. Right now we ask that you just allow this word that you have prepared to be here a meal so that we might feast on the wisdom, that we might understand what you have brought forth, and that whatever word you have here, that it might be a full blessing for those persons around us, that we might be able to go out and tell somebody else, say, hey, look at what I learned today, but when we come to them, they'll already see it because they'll see the joy on our countenance. And right now, God, we ask that you just allow this, your vessel, to decrease a little so that you might increase, so that all that we see and hear and know is just you. We love you, oh God. We thank you, God. We magnify you. We lift you up and praise your holy name. These and other blessings we ask in your holy Son, Jesus' name, we do pray. Amen. Earlier today, we heard some verses from 1 Samuel, the first chapter, the 13th through the 1st through the 12th verse. And so I'm going to read just a few verses past so that we can continue our story of Hannah. See, Hannah, and I love to talk about Hannah because it's interesting that in a book that's named Samuel that comes right after the book of Ruth, where it talks about the lives of these women and how they had to rearrange their lives, we open up this next book that goes in a completely different direction, focused on the women and how they prayed. So verse 13 says, Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. See, I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my own great anxiety anxiety and vexation at this time. And then Eli answered, go in peace. The God of Israel grants the petition you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your sight. And then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. And they rose in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I have asked him of the Lord. And I would just offer for a few moments for us to meditate on the subject, when prayer is the disruption. When prayer is the disruption. We know that God will never put more on us than we can bear, and so sometimes prayer is our disruption. See, everywhere we look now, it seems that the pandemic is beginning to end. We have gotten used to a new normal. We figured out how to live with the circumstances that is not the most ideal, yet it was the life that was to be led for at that moment. Children have returned to school. See, adults have returned to work, and churches are reopening to full capacity. At least some of them are. Even if that means that they are hybrid and in person, they have returned to all the things that they have started to do somewhat before the pandemic. Some are even venturing into no longer requiring masks inside buildings. People want more than anything for this to be over, but we are forever altered by what we have experienced. Certainly, even I have learned how to cope with whatever it is that has come about, and have figured out I'll just do this today, and maybe this won't get done, but at the end of the day, I know that it'll all work out because of how we have learned to live in this new particular normal for us. In the text today, Elkanah, a Levite, has taken his yearly trip to Shiloh from Ramah to make his sacrifice. For this journey, he brought his family with him as the yearly privilege. The distance of about 14 miles, likely by horse and buggies, was a sacrifice also made during a feast time. That means that they'll be able to actually see their families again. They may not be able to often see their families because 14 miles isn't a lot to us today. That's just going to the other side of Louisville, right? But 14 miles with horse and buggy without a car takes a little bit more work. But see, being in Elkanah's family even included Hannah and Peninnah and all of Peninnah's children, who were all gathered for travel. And being of the Levite lineage, Elkanah was one who was permitted to make the sacrifice. So he went to the temple where Eli's son Hophni and Phinehas were the high priest. And while they were there, all is normal. Elkanah makes a sacrifice, gives portions of meat to his family. And just like every year, just like Norma, Hannah, who was his favorite, received a double portion. Peninnah, who did not receive the double portion but had his children, taunts and berates Hannah over the fact that she cannot have children. Hannah was the first wife and the favorite wife of Elkanah, the one who received a double portion, the one who he loved. She was, however, without child. Peninnah, Elkanah's older wife, had many children. Peninnah, who no doubt noticed how Hannah was given the double portion, would taunt and flaunt and otherwise bully Hannah mercilessly about what seemed to be her one flaw. Peninnah probably felt like she should receive more meat since she has the most children. So why is this woman who doesn't have any children getting the most meat when I have more mouths to feed? I can imagine that Peninnah was probably thinking those things. But even Hannah, who cannot bear children, is sensitive to her condition. And she felt this tremendously in her heart. See, not having a child meant that your value at that time was lowered in the community. Childless women were sometimes ostracized and not protected. And if Elkanah did not love her, he could have put her away or even punished her for what her body could not seem to do. The Midrash, the Jewish interpretation of the text, says the reason Peninnah was in the picture was to have the children where Hannah could not. So Hannah is a woman desperate for a different outcome. And this is not an uncommon situation. See, in fact, in Genesis, Sarah Hagar brought in to bear children. Sarah later has a child, Isaac, but the similar case also occurs with Jacob and his wives to a different extent with Leah and Rachel. Rachel, after watching her sister marry her love, waiting 14 years in total to have the one that she wanted, has trouble conceiving. But Rachel's goal was to make up for the time she lost, even if it meant her demise. Oh, but Hannah, being a Jewish woman of the tribe of Benjamin, Rachel's youngest son would know about the lineage of Rachel. See, they lived in Ramah on the tribe of Benjamin's property. See, she probably, even as people do today, prayed regularly at the tomb of Rachel that God may open her womb. If you go to Israel today, you will see many, many women in this room with this tomb praying, God, please open my womb so that I might be able to conceive, so that I might be able to do the one thing that my culture has asked me to do. Please, God, please. But for whatever reason, during this particular trip to Shiloh, Hannah decided something different must occur. Hannah became a woman desperate for a different outcome. See, there was nothing that she could do. She was not home where people knew her, so she could not go talk to the doctors again. Her joy had been stolen on what should have been a happy time with family because they don't often see her. But see, Hannah was crying. She could not even eat the double portion of meat that she got because of the circumstances. I don't know about you, but I hate it when I see people have a really big portion of something that I really, really wanted, and they just sit there and let it go to waste because they're not feeling it that day. Imagine it was like a big old piece of steak and she just left it right there on the table because she could not eat. Her depression was so strong in her stomach, it would not allow her to do what it was that she needed to do just to give herself sustenance. And she had altered her reality. She had made it so that this other woman could come in and allow the lineage to go forward, and she lived with the normal as long as she could. But it was hard for her because she wanted to be past this particular part of her life. See, I wonder what even Elkanah must have felt trying to show how much he loved this woman, but the gift was not enough. I wonder if Penina realized that she took out the feeling of being a single mother onto Hannah, where she had children, but not the love and the affection of the man who she created the lives with. I wondered if this outburst happened in front of children, and now the trip had turned sour. See, they had to still get on the road after the Niners berating her. Can you imagine being in a long trip home with people that you're not happy with? You're going to be on the road for hours and hours and hours, and you mad at the people you in a car with? That's not a pleasant trip. I know I wouldn't want to make that. So Hannah became a woman desperate for a different outcome. But Hannah also knew that as the first wife, she could change the culture within a household by using a new tactic. Her tactic is prayer. It's all she had. Prayer had to be enough in this case. See, Hannah risked going into the temple to pray at the altar where her husband is allowed to sacrifice. Hannah is not allowed to sacrifice there, but her husband is allowed to sacrifice. Her prayer is a risk. See, Jewish temples were split up by sex, and it's certain that this woman was not supposed to be in the temple even where she was. Hannah was on a mission and doesn't even just give the business as usual prayer. From this description, Hannah tarried. Now, I know we don't tarry like we used to, but Hannah got on the altar and she tarried, but she didn't even let her prayer be heard because what she knew was that her prayer was personal. But she tarried, and just like a dancer will leave it all on the dance floor, she left it all on the altar. She gave a fervent prayer in the temple. See, Hannah is careful to only ask for one child and to give it back to God. Verse 1:7 says she made this vow, "Oh Lord of hosts, if only you look on the misery of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazarite until the day of his death. And he shall drink Neither wine nor intoxicants, and a razor shall never touch his head. So even in her desperation, she is careful to make her petition and tell God what she would do when the blessing came forward. Hannah said, "Here, God, I am coming." Like the old hymn say, not my mother, not my father, not my sister, not my brother. I am not sending my prayer through my husband. See me and understand what situation you have placed me in. See that this is something you have done to many generations in my family. Come and heal this household and my future generations so that this is no longer the conversation. Intercede on my behalf, Lord. Make my household whole, Lord. Disrupt this toxic environment, Lord. Make it so that society won't judge us, Lord, just because we had to do something else to continue what the heirs say that we must do. Make our household whole through this one child. And when you do, I will give my sacrifice in my own way. Hannah was desperate for a different outcome, and she used prayer to make the initial disruption. So why all this talk of Hannah on Electionary Sunday? Certainly there are many things we could be speaking of today, and we will speak of. There's the Ahmaud Arbery trial where black pastors were told they could not go, and it's American Indian History Month where we want to recognize what has happened with them, but also recognize there's a complicated history that involved enslavement that dealt with both of our ethnicities, or that there are many black and brown girls and boys across the nation that do not get the same attention as their white counterparts when they go missing, or even the trial in Kenosha where we're trying to have seeking proper justice, but it's already seeming as if it's going to be business as usual. Indeed, I would say that perhaps we are all like Hannah in some way, seeing what typically happens in cases and experiences like this and desperate for a different outcome. And in cases such as these, we wonder what we can do in our own power if we cannot go to these locations or protests. What can we do? Reverend McIntyre, I already pray. Prayer don't always seem like it's enough. Prayer needs action. I say to you that we have to start with the disruptive prayer. See, I think Hannah can provide a potential blueprint for the disruptive prayer through cases that almost seem impossible to rectify. See, Hannah first, she faced herself. Why are you coming to the altar to pray this prayer? Hannah's fervent prayers were not because of the society's expectations of her to conceive. She'd already figured that out. It wasn't because of Penina's taunting and flaunting, and even if it did drive her to her sadness, that wasn't the reason why she went. Hannah was there because the pressure was taking its toll on her. Having brought in Penina did not give her the satisfaction that she had expected. It did not give her the peace in her household that she thought it would. See, Hannah and her duty to the others, and her willingness to pour out to others, and her making decisions for community and understanding her place in her world had neglected herself. So even her husband was not enough for her to be happy because she didn't have the happiness within herself. What Hannah had to address at the altar wasn't external. She had to address the places where her faith had been shaken on the inside. See, Hannah recognized her own hurt and what she was carrying. Hannah said in verse 115, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. And I have been speaking out of my own great anxiety and vexation all this time. Hannah has to show up to God herself, not only the sacrifices and covering her husband, but what she can do, what she can speak for herself. She had to show up not with the car she draws or the clothes she wore. She had to show up not with what she had accomplished in this world. She had to show up not for others, but for herself. She had to speak from the lineage of ancestry of what she knew God could do. She had to speak of how God had blessed her with her heart's desire for her husband. Hannah had to speak beyond her depression, beyond her self-doubt, beyond the things that troubled her spirit. Hannah had to speak past it all. Hannah made the decision to speak on her behalf to God, she finds that she must advocate for herself. You ever been in a situation where you're like, I'm going to be vulnerable today. I'm going to do what I do. I'm going to show people who I really am. And the first thing that you have to do is get pushback because you were yourself. Hannah had to advocate for herself. Some say that it's being steadfast and unmovable. See, her specific way of petitioning God looked out of the ordinary to the human eye. Even Eli questioned her intention and accused her of coming to the altar impure. Y'all missed it. Let me explain why this is important. Eli comes out to talk to her. Y'all missed it. Let me explain. See, she is in a house in a temple that is run by Hophni and Phinehas. Eli is their father. He don't need to come out for anybody. He doesn't do everyday operations. You don't need to see Eli ever. Why does Eli even come out? He doesn't even have to do the task of the regular feast. He's a big priest. Eli's like the CEO of a company, and it's like he's addressing an hourly employee who somehow wandered into the wrong office. See, if Eli made even the implication of a woman who was already bearing and seeming to not be worthy at the altar, also coming forward in an improper way, it could damage her whole family and make their sacrifice null and void. And so when he asked her, why are you here? And if she was drunk, she stood firm. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring my soul before the Lord. Eli, you might be the priest, but don't mistake what you see with others and put it on me. Sometimes we pray but won't stand up for our own vulnerability. See, Hannah looked at Eli and said, I'm not scared. This isn't what you think. I am Hannah, and this is why I am here, no cap. Hannah was so steadfast that Eli could only say, go in peace. God of Israel, grant the petition you have made to him. And Hannah's peace was immediate. She went by herself, and she advocated for herself, and her peace was immediate. I ain't gonna go there today and talk about how sometimes we'll go leave it on the altar and then pick it back up and take us with us, and our peace is almost violated because we didn't just leave it there where it was supposed to go. See, Hannah's internal satisfaction was knowing that God was capable because of her faith. Eli didn't know what she prayed to God about. She prayed it to herself silently. And so the peace that she got was internal because it wasn't something that had to be affirmed verbally because she knew the affirmation was there. The text does not say, though, that her problems were magically fixed, nor does it say that it was instantaneous. In fact, in like verse 19, it says it was in due time. Lord, I don't like in due time. I tell you that in due time if you don't have a good relationship. But I get it, I don't like in due time. But she said, I'm going to be okay with it in due time. But it says, though, that Hannah's approach changed. Just like we knew of the Spanish flu in the 1920s and polio and other diseases brought forward, we know that in time we will step beyond the current circumstances of this pandemic. But until that time, how do we continue to change our own approach to how we engage with what is going on for us? And the next day after this encounter with Eli that she probably didn't tell her husband about, they went back to worship, and Hannah's worship was in the prophetic. Hannah's worship was saying, I know you're going to put more on me than I can bear. Hannah's worship was right there. Hannah's worship knew more than what the current circumstances did. Hannah's worship allowed her a peace because she could already see what was going to happen. And she knew her God was faithful. And she knew that things would happen. And she knew that she would be blessed. So she had a prophetic confidence. She had a spiritual comfort that already said that it's already done. That God has already come through here. That God has already made it so that it will be so. But what is most fascinating, and I promise I'm going to take my seat in just a second, but I need you all to see this part. What is most fascinating for me is that Hannah had a hidden knowledge. We think it's because Eli showed up and said to her, go in peace, that the see, Hannah knew her lineage. She knew that Sarah had to be challenged by God after Sarah made her request, so that she knew that once that happened, then God was going to go forth and her name could change. She knew that Rachel had already addressed directly God and that things came forward and that opposition came even when Rachel addressed God. So Hannah understood that Eli's presence, the CEO coming down when he doesn't have to, is that she was actually being visited by God. And so because she had been already, when she made her petition, already initially challenged, then it was already done. Because how many of you know that once you say that you are going to turn your attention to what God is going to have you to do, you get opposition in a moment. And how many people will just crumble in the opposition in a moment? But baby, that's your first test. And if you don't pass that first test, you won't pass the rest of them. And you have to know that your prayer is disruptive. And if your prayer is disruptive and it's going to change things, it doesn't matter what you're doing at that moment. It doesn't matter if someone comes and says, oh, well, I don't believe in your prayer, but you know what? God got my prayer. Thank you for the confirmation that God is going to do what God is going to do. You ought to be worried if God doesn't challenge your prayer. Then you might not be praying for the thing that you know is there. But all I'm saying today, and I'm asking you in your business as usual, are you willing to be vulnerable and allow God to use your prayer to disrupt your situation? Are you willing to name your circumstance that has been brought out to you? Are you willing to say, God, I am going through life even when things are good, but I am hoping for joy from the inside. I ain't worried about joy from the outside because the world can't give that joy. The world can't take it away. And so because that joy is there on the inside, that what I asked you for, that what you challenged me for to make sure that's what I wanted and that's what I needed. You said I will bless you, and that because of that, then I will have the peace of already knowing that it is already done. It is already done. Will you advocate for yourself in your prayers today? Will you say, I'm going to make this vow today? Will you open up your mind and recognize when God is going to show God's self in that challenge for you? Will you challenge yourself to say, I'm going to have that inner peace? I'm going to have that peace because my prayer is disruptive, and my prayer is enough to disrupt whatever things won't allow me to heal. And my prayer is enough to disrupt anything that might come against me. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. I'm more than a conqueror because I have the peace of the Lord here. Let your prayer be a disruption. The doors of the church are open.